I've had the Nikon V1 for about a month now. I love it. I've pretty much put it through its paces and it's done great. I've been able to just carry it around everywhere, I guess, because it's so small. Now, today I want to give you a meaningful review of the camera rather than a, clinical tour of each and every feature, which, okay, I still will do in another video, but in this video, it's not my intention to show you every single option and menu item. Let's start by taking a quick tour of the body of the camera. Here are some size comparisons to the V1 body. This is a V1 compared to a D3100, and a PowerShot G7, an iPhone, a king of shovels, okay spades, a record, Barbie, a Ford Mustang, an altimeter, a toy hermit crab, a desktop hard drive, and a barrel of monkeys. The body doesn't have very many buttons on it. In fact, the front of the camera, well, it only has one. It's the lens release button, and it's right here. I have the 10 to 30 millimeter lens here. It is the kit lens. It has a 2.7x crop factor, so it makes it like the 27 to 81 in 35 millimeter equivalent. The lens locks into place. You see there's a little button here, so it's pretty compact, but then you unlock it and extend it out to use it. But then you just lock it back into place when you don't want to use it. The microphone is here on the front of the camera too. Now, the top has the on-off switch. It has the shutter release button and the movie record button, and the speaker is here too. And it also has the hot shoe. On this side, there are connectors. You've got a couple of connectors for connecting to a computer or to a TV, but you also have a microphone connector, so you can connect an external mic. Now, for me, this is exciting because I can connect a really nice microphone up to it and utilize this camera's awesome video capabilities. The bottom has the tripod mount and the battery and memory card door. It takes an SD card, by the way. The back is where most of the goodies are. The viewfinder here is electronic. It is a teeny tiny LCD screen in there, and there's a diopter adjustment on the side here. And there is a big LCD screen, and it is beautiful. Now, for all the buttons and dials. Most of these buttons do different things depending on different modes you can be in the camera. So I'm going to briefly show you the buttons, but know that there are multiple uses for many of them. Let's start from the top. You have the feature button. This does different things in each of the different camera modes. When you're taking still images, it allows you to choose mechanical shutter, electronic shutter, or high-speed electronic shutter, which, by the way, unlocks 10, 30, and 60 frames per second at the camera's full resolution. When you are recording movies, you can choose between slow motion and HD. Next to that button is a lever of sorts. When you're in playback, you can zoom in or zoom out, but it also adjusts your aperture or shutter speed depending on the mode you're in. Here's the mode dial. You can move from motion snapshot to smart photo selector to still image mode to movie mode. Right next to that is a nice little rubbery pad for your thumb so you can hang on to the camera. Below that is the display button. It will change the display to show you different amounts of information. It will also turn the big LCD screen off when you're shooting, so you'll only be able to look through the viewfinder. Then there's the playback button. It turns playback on and off. Who'd have guessed? Below that, you've got the multi-selector. This does numerous things. You have the auto exposure, autofocus lock button, the exposure compensation button, the self-timer button, and you can choose your autofocus mode. In manual exposure mode, you also use the dial to change the aperture. And the OK button in the middle is pretty self-explanatory. It confirms the changes you make. The menu button is, it takes you to the menus. The trash can button deletes images when you're in playback. Okay, now let's take a quick look at the menus. You press the menu button, and you have 3 different menus, and you use the multi-selector, either the buttons or the wheel, to move through them. First is the playback menu. It lets you customize playback. You can delete multiple images at once. You can create a slideshow on the LCD screen, or even if you plug it in, you can create the slideshow on your TV. You can do a little bit of photo editing in the camera too. You can apply active delighting, you can resize an image, or you can crop an image. Or you can edit the start and end points of a movie. Next, you have the shooting menu. You can reset everything to default. You can change the exposure mode, which is super important. You have auto scene mode, program mode, aperture priority, shutter priority, and manual. You can change your image quality and image size. You can choose the shutter type, single or continuous. Shutter type, which I showed you before. You can change metering, you can change white balance, ISO sensitivity. You have a few different options here. You have auto ISO settings, a few of them, and then ISOs ranging from 100 to high 1. You've got picture control, active delighting, long exposure noise reduction, high ISO noise reduction. You have vibration reduction here instead of on the lens. You have normal, active, and off for that. You can also choose your autofocus area mode and turn face priority autofocus on or off. There are a few other things that appear when you're in movie mode. You can change the frame rate for slow motion movies. You can use 400 frames per second or 1200 frames per second, but you do lose resolution here. It's still bitchin' though. You can change your movie settings for HD movies. You can do 1080 60i, 1080 30p, and 720 60p. Last, you have the setup menu. The important things here are formatting the memory card. This erases all of your images. In sound settings, you can turn off the sounds, which I like to do because the beeping drives me batty. Stop beeping at me! You're driving me batty! You can assign the auto exposure, autofocus lock button to lock exposure or lock focus or lock both. Under shutter button auto exposure lock, you can decide if half pressing the shutter release button will lock exposure. You can set the time zone and date and the language. Okay, that was a pretty quick walkthrough. I will make videos on how to use this camera for still photos and on how to use this camera for movies. And I'll go through all the options for those. I did want to show you an accessory that I have, the speed light for the V1. It is the SBN5. I have also the kit lens, the 10 to 30, but there are 3 other lenses currently available for this camera. Also coming up is the FT1, which is the F-mount adapter. That'll be interesting. Now for the opinion portion of today's review. I said in the beginning that I'm enjoying this camera thoroughly, but there are 2 things that I wish were different. First, I wish I could turn off the image review. It is kind of disorienting to look through the viewfinder, take a photo, it stays in the viewfinder, and then I look up and I see the real world. And a lot of times it's significantly different than what I just looked at. I'm sure I'll be able to get used to it, but I'd rather just be able to turn it off. The second thing I would change is that I would add an info button or a My Menu at least. I don't mind not having tons of buttons and dials on the body of the camera. However, to make changes to the settings, I have to go through the menus. Now, I don't need to make quick settings changes between each shot. I use this more as a fun on-the-go camera. But that being said, I wish I didn't have to go through all the menu items to find what I'm looking for. I wish there was something like the info button on my D3100 that lets me see all of the important settings on one screen and lets me change them on that screen. The important thing to remember is that this isn't a mini D3S, but there's a lot of power in this little thing. I see a lot of people saying that the sensor is too small and other ways that it's not exactly like a DSLR in a smaller package. It's not a DSLR replacement for professional work, but often I'm using my pro cameras in situations that do not require all of that horsepower. Those are the occasions where I enjoy using my light and agile V1 more. Carrying a DSLR around is a commitment, but this camera is much smaller and lighter, so in many cases, it's a less obtrusive traveling companion. Also, it draws much less attention than a DSLR for situations where I just prefer not to be noticed. But I'm still getting quality images, and I still have the flexibility that I want. Okay, now that I've said it's not a DSLR replacement, it does rival DSLR quality in low light, and it has much better autofocus during video. It has near instant response time for still images and shooting speed up to 60 frames per second. So frankly, DSLRs are on notice that these little guys can pack a big punch and do as well or better than them in several areas. One thing that you do have on DSLRs, especially the higher end ones, is buttons. Lots of buttons to change the camera settings in an instant. With the V1, using the menus, it takes longer to change settings from shot to shot. So if you've seen in my other videos, you know that I have several DSLRs that I use often. I am not about to get rid of any one of them. But when I head out the door for a night on the town or other fun activities, I find myself reaching for the V1 instead of the heavier bodies, confident that I will come home with very good results. As I mentioned, this isn't a D3S replacement, but what about a replacement for an entry-level DSLR, like the D3100? Maybe so. Stay tuned for my V1 versus D3100 deathmatch to find out. So, is this the right camera for you? I can't answer that. Everyone is looking for something a little bit different. If you're like me and like to get the camera set up and then enjoy great speed and responsiveness, this is a great little camera. If you're going to be adjusting white balance and focus mode and other settings from shot to shot, you're going to be able to work faster with the DSLR, but you'll also be carrying around more weight and bulk. So for me, I use this camera every day, but I bring the DSLRs out when I need to work quickly in changing environments. Like I said though, when fun is a priority, the V1 is my go-to camera. I know I haven't covered every aspect of the camera in this video. I'll certainly be making some more in-depth videos soon. In the meantime though, let me know if you have any questions.